The auction block. The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a gunshot through the February cold. Lot 17. Widow woman, 6 whelps included. Start the bidding at $20. Evelyn Hart's breath crystallized in the Wyoming air as rough hands shoved her onto the platform beside livestock pens. Her children huddled below, their tear-stained faces turned upward. The crowd jeered, men called out bids, not for her family whole, but for individual children, strong boys worth more separated. Her brother-in-law Calvin smirked from the front row, the forged debt papers folded in his coat pocket. This was his revenge. This was her reckoning. Before we begin Evelyn's journey from that auction block to freedom, I invite you to stay with us until the very end. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see just how far Evelyn's fight for her family travels. Now, let's step into the bitter cold of Bitter Creek, Wyoming, 1867. The wind carried the stench of fear. Evelyn Hart had smelled it before, in the hospital tent where her husband Thomas drew his last rattling breath, in the cramped boarding house room where she'd counted coins by candlelight, trying to make $2 stretch across 7 mouths. But she'd never smelled it on herself until today, standing on a pine platform in the town square while strange men appraised her children like cattle. "The boys look sturdy enough," someone called from the crowd. "How old's the tall one?" "Eli's 12, the auctioneer answered, consulting papers that had no right to exist. "Good for field work, stable work. Trains up obedient, I'm told." Evelyn's fingers curled into fists inside her threadbare gloves. Eli stood below with his siblings, Matthew, 9, the twins, Samuel and Sarah, 7, Rebecca, 5, and baby Grace, barely 2, clutched against Matthew's thin chest. 6 faces turned toward her, waiting for their mother to fix this, to make the nightmare stop. She couldn't. The auction block stood in Bitter Creek's main square, positioned between the mercantile and the land office where Calvin Hart had filed his fraudulent claim 3 weeks ago. The document alleged that Thomas had borrowed $500 before his death, a sum so astronomical it might as well have been $5,000. The supposed collateral, everything. The house Thomas built, the 40 acres he'd cleared stone by stone, his widow, his children. All of it, Calvin claimed, now belonged to him by default of unpaid debt. And since Evelyn couldn't produce that fictional $500, the territorial court had ordered liquidation, which was a polite word for what was happening. "Do I hear $20? The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square. Snow had begun to fall, tiny flakes that caught in Evelyn's dark hair and settled on her shoulders like a veil. "20 for the lot, or we can separate them. Boys usually fetch more individual. 25 for the 2 oldest boys." A man in a cattleman's coat raised his hand. "Don't need the rest." Eli's head whipped toward the bidder, his young face draining of color. Matthew's arms tightened around Grace. "No separation," Evelyn said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "You will not divide this family." The auctioneer ignored her. 25 for the boys. Do I hear 30? 30 for all 3 boys." Another voice, this one belonging to a mine foreman Evelyn recognized from the supply store. He'd lost 2 workers in a collapse last month. Replacements came cheaper when you didn't have to pay them wages. Evelyn's breath came shorter. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Around the square, familiar faces watched. The grocer who'd extended her credit, the seamstress who'd hired her for mending, the banker who'd refused her loan. Not one of them spoke up. Not one of them questioned the legality of auctioning human beings in 1867, 2 years after the war that was supposed to end such things. But debt changed the rules. Debt made people property again. "Mama?" Rebecca's small voice carried across the cold air. "Mama, I'm scared." "Be brave, sweetheart." Evelyn forced steadiness into her tone. "Remember what I told you. No matter what happens, your hearts, you belong to each other." Touching. Calvin's voice cut through the moment like a blade. He'd moved closer to the platform, close enough that Evelyn could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "But facts are facts, Evelyn. Thomas died owing me money. The law says I collect." "Thomas never borrowed a cent from you." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "That document is a forgery, and you know it. That document bears his signature and a notary seal." Calvin's smile never reached his eyes. The judge examined it himself, found it legally binding. The judge examined a lie. The judge examined evidence. You're welcome to present your own, if you have any. He paused, letting the words sink in. But you don't. Because Thomas was careless with records, careless with money, and careless with his family's future. That's not my fault. The auctioneer cleared his throat, impatient. We continuing or not? Got other lots to move. Continue. Calvin stepped back, hands in his coat pockets. I want this settled today. Evelyn's mind raced through options she'd already exhausted. She'd searched Thomas's papers for proof of the loan's falsehood. Nothing. She'd begged the judge for an extension. Denied. She'd written letters to territorial authorities. Unanswered. Every door had closed. Every path had ended here, on this platform, with her children's futures being decided by whoever had cash in hand. $40 for the whole group. A new voice joined the bidding. Widow can cook, kids can work. 40's fair. 50. The mine foreman again. Evelyn closed her eyes. Numbers climbed. Her children's worth calculated in dollars and utility. When she opened her eyes again, she found Eli watching her with an expression far too old for 12. He was trying to be strong for his siblings, trying to shoulder what no child should carry, just like she was. $60! The cattleman raised his bid. Final offer. The 2 boys. No others. They stay together, Evelyn said again, louder this time. I don't care what your papers say, Calvin. I don't care what the judge ruled. These children are not livestock. They're not property. And I will not let you separate them to satisfy your greed. Your wants stopped mattering when you couldn't pay your debts. Calvin's voice hardened. The law is the law, Evelyn. You can accept it with dignity or without, but you'll accept it. The crowd murmured. Some nodded agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet her eyes, but equally unwilling to intervene. Bitter Creek was a small town, and Calvin Hart owned the lumber mill that employed half the men present. Opposition had costs. 65. Someone new entered the bidding, a farmer Evelyn didn't recognize. For the woman and the girls, boys can go elsewhere. No. Eli's voice cracked across the word. He pushed forward through the crowd, Matthew following. We stay with our mother, all of us. Get those boys back in line, the auctioneer ordered. 2 men moved to comply, grabbing Eli and Matthew by their shoulders. The twins began to cry. Rebecca clutched Sarah's hand. Grace wailed, the sound piercing through the falling snow. This was how families broke. Not with violence, though that came too, but with rules and documents and men who convinced themselves they were simply following procedure. This was how children disappeared into mines and brothels and unmarked graves. This was how mothers went mad. Evelyn felt the platform's edge beneath her heel. 1 step back and she'd fall. 1 step forward and she'd be fighting men with guns and law on their side. Either direction led to loss. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Quiet, but it carried. $70. The crowd went silent. Even Grace's crying seemed to pause. Every head turned toward the speaker. He stood at the edge of the square, half obscured by snow and shadow. Tall, perhaps 6'2", with a weathered rancher's coat and a hat pulled low. What Evelyn could see of his face showed a jagged scar running from temple to jaw on the left side. The kind of mark that spoke of violence survived, barely. The auctioneer squinted. That for the boys? For all of them. The man's voice remained level. Woman and 6 children. $70 for the family whole. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. $70 was more than any single bidder had offered, more than most men in Bitter Creek saw in half a year. The cattleman scowled, but didn't counter. The mine foreman shook his head and stepped back. Calvin's jaw tightened. Who are you? Reed Callahan. The man moved forward into clearer view. The scar was worse up close, a wound that should have killed him, by the look of it. His eyes, though, were steady, gray as the February sky. I'm bidding 70. This is a legal auction, Calvin said. You can't just... 70 is the high bid. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Anyone going higher? Silence. The crowd waited. Calvin looked like he wanted to object, but the law he'd used to orchestrate this moment now trapped him. If he raised the bid himself, he'd expose the auction for what it truly was. Not debt collection, but punishment. Sold. The gavel cracked down. Lot 17 goes to Reed Callahan for $70. Evelyn's knees nearly buckled. Relief and terror warred in her chest. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted, what he'd expect. But her children wouldn't be separated. That single fact anchored her as hands helped her down from the platform. Reed Callahan approached the auctioneer's table, producing a leather pouch. He counted out coins with careful precision, gold eagles and silver dollars that gleamed under the gray sky. The auctioneer verified the amount, marked his ledger, and handed Reed a receipt. "They're yours now," the auctioneer said. "Legally transferred." Evelyn watched Reed fold the receipt and tuck it inside his coat. His movements were economical, almost military in their efficiency. When he finally looked at her, his expression was unreadable. "Ma'am," he nodded once. "Children should get out of this cold." "What happens now?" Evelyn heard the tremor in her voice and hated it. "What do you want from us?" "Right now? Want you to not freeze." He gestured toward a wagon stationed near the livery. "That's mine. Climb in. We'll talk once you're warm." "I need to know." "And you will." Something shifted in his eyes. Not impatience, but understanding. "I know what you're thinking, what you're afraid of. We'll address it. But first, your children need shelter. That acceptable?" Evelyn looked past him to where her 6 children huddled together, watching this exchange with wide eyes. Grace had stopped crying, but her little fist clutched Matthew's collar. Eli's face showed the same wariness Evelyn felt. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, but options had run out. "All right," Evelyn straightened her spine. "We'll go with you." Reed nodded and turned toward the children. As he passed Calvin, he paused. "The debt's satisfied," Reed said quietly. "You got your money. Business is concluded." "This isn't finished." Calvin's voice dropped to match. "You don't know what you've bought into, Callahan." "I know exactly what I'm doing." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, some wordless understanding passing between them that Evelyn couldn't interpret. Then Reed continued toward the wagon and Calvin stalked away through the snow. Evelyn gathered her children. Matthew handed Grace to her, and the baby's weight in her arms felt like the only real thing in a world gone strange. Eli stayed close to her shoulder. The others clustered tight. "Is he going to hurt us?" Rebecca whispered. "I don't know, sweetheart." Evelyn smoothed her daughter's hair. "But we stay together. That's what matters. We stay together." They walked to the wagon as a unit. Reed had already climbed into the driver's seat. Up close, Evelyn could see more details. The calluses on his hands, the careful way he held the reins, the quality of his boots beneath the road dust. Working man's clothes, but well-maintained, a man who took care of his things, or a man who knew how to present himself. "There's blankets in back," Reed said. "Wrap up tight. Ranch is an hour's ride." Evelyn helped the children into the wagon bed. There were indeed blankets, thick wool, recently cleaned, and a crate of apples, and a jug that proved to contain water, not whiskey. Small details, but they registered. She climbed in last and pulled Grace onto her lap. Eli sat beside her, tense as wire. Reed clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched into motion. Bitter Creek fell away behind them. Evelyn watched the town disappear into the snow. The square where she'd been sold, the boarding house where she'd failed to make rent, the church where Thomas's funeral had been held. Every building held a memory of struggle. Every street corner, a reminder of how thoroughly she'd lost. "Mama?" Matthew leaned against her side. "Where are we going?" "To Mr. Callahan's ranch." "And then?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart." The truth was bitter as the wind, but it was all she had. They rode in silence through the falling snow. The road climbed into hills, leaving the valley behind. Evelyn tried to mark landmarks, a lightning-split pine, a creek crossing, a rock formation that looked like a broken tooth. If she needed to find her way back, if she needed to run, these details would matter. Grace fell asleep against her chest. The twins dozed, wrapped together in blankets. Only Eli stayed alert, watching Reed's back with the suspicion of someone who'd learned that kindness often came with hidden costs. Evelyn understood that wariness. She shared it. Reed Callahan had paid $70 for a widow and 6 children. Men didn't make that kind of investment without expecting returns. The question was what form those returns would take. An hour passed, maybe more. Time moved strangely in the cold. Then Reed guided the horses off the main road onto a smaller track that wound between snow-laden pines. The path climbed steadily until it crested a ridge, and there, spread across a high valley, was the ranch. It wasn't large. A main house built from logs and river stone, a barn, a stable, corrals empty of livestock, a chicken coop. But everything looked solid, well built, the kind of place a man carved from wilderness with his own hands and meant to last. Reed drove the wagon to the house and set the brake. He climbed down without a word and began unhitching the horses. After a moment's hesitation, Eli jumped from the wagon bed. "I can help with that," he said. Reed glanced at him. "You know horses?" "My father taught me." Eli's chin lifted. "I can earn my keep." Something passed across Reed's face, an expression Evelyn couldn't quite name. Then he handed Eli the harness strap. "Appreciate it. Take them to the stable. 3rd stall, and 4th, left side. There's grain in the bin by the door, not too much." Eli nodded and led the horses away. Reed watched him go, then turned to the wagon where Evelyn still sat with the younger children. "House is warm," he said, "doors unlocked." "Just like that?" Evelyn heard the edge in her voice. "We just walk in?" "Would you prefer to wait in the cold until I explain myself?" "I'd prefer to know what you expect from us." Reed was quiet for a moment. Snow collected on his hat brim. Behind him, smoke rose from the house chimney. Someone had banked the fire before he left for town. "What I expect," he said slowly, "is for you to get those children inside before they catch pneumonia. After that, we'll talk. Fair enough?" It wasn't an answer, but Grace stirred against Evelyn's chest, and Rebecca was shivering despite the blankets. And standing in a frozen wagon bed arguing with a stranger who'd bought them wouldn't change the fundamental reality of their situation. "Fair enough," Evelyn agreed. She gathered Grace and climbed down. Matthew and the twins followed, staying close to her skirts. Rebecca took Samuel's hand. Together they approached the house. The door opened easily beneath Evelyn's hand. Inside, warmth hit like a physical force. A fire burned in a massive stone hearth. Oil lamps provided steady light. The space was larger than it looked from outside. A main room with kitchen area, a table that could seat 8, chairs worn comfortable with use. Stairs led to a 2nd floor. Doors opened to what looked like bedrooms on the ground level. It was clean. That registered immediately. No dust, no disorder. Dishes washed and stacked, floors swept. The home of a man who lived alone but hadn't surrendered to chaos. "It's warm," Sarah breathed, pulling off her gloves. "Don't touch anything." Evelyn kept her voice gentle but firm. "Not yet." They stood in an uncertain cluster near the door. Grace's head lifted from Evelyn's shoulder, her eyes heavy with sleep. Matthew knelt to help Rebecca with her boots. Samuel and Sarah stayed pressed together like they'd been since birth. The door opened again. Reed entered, stamping snow from his boots. Eli came behind him, looking windburned and wary. "Stable's secure," Eli reported. "Horses are good." "Thank you." Reed hung his hat on a peg. "There's stew on the stove. Made it this morning. Should still be hot. Bread in the box if you're hungry." No one moved. 6 pairs of eyes watched him with the stillness of prey animals assessing a predator. Reed looked at them all, really looked, his gaze moving from Evelyn's face to each child in turn. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I know what you're thinking. Man doesn't pay $70 without wanting something back. You're right to be cautious." He pulled out a chair and sat, putting himself at eye level with the children. "So here's the truth, plain as I can make it. I didn't buy you to work you, didn't buy you to hurt you, bought you to get you out." "Why?" The question escaped before Evelyn could stop it. Reed's hand rose to the scar on his face, fingers tracing the puckered line almost unconsciously. "Because I know what it's like to be on that auction block. Different circumstances, maybe. But I know how it feels when the whole world decides you're worth less than livestock." His gray eyes met Evelyn's, "And I know what happens when nobody steps up." Silence filled the space. Outside, wind rattled the windows. The fire crackled. Grace made a small sound against Evelyn's neck. You have questions, Reed continued, and you should. But right now, those children need food and rest. So here's what's going to happen. You'll eat. I'll show you where everyone sleeps. Tomorrow morning, we'll sit down and talk details. Expectations, arrangements, how long you stay, what comes next. But tonight, you're safe and warm. That acceptable? Evelyn searched his face for deception, for the crack in the facade where true intentions would show. But all she saw was the scar and the steady eyes, and something in his expression that looked like truth. That's acceptable, she said finally. Reed nodded and stood. Bowls are in the cupboard by the sink. Help yourselves to as much as you want. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Give you space to settle. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. One rule, he added, only one, and it's not negotiable. In this house, we tell the truth. I don't care if it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. I don't care if you think I want to hear something different. Truth is the foundation of everything else. We clear on that? We're clear, Evelyn said. Good. He pulled his hat back on. Welcome to Callahan Ranch. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Matthew's stomach growled, loud enough that Sarah giggled despite herself, and the tension broke. I think we should eat, Evelyn said. Rebecca, can you help me set the table? The children moved into action with the practiced efficiency of a family used to working together. Rebecca found bowls, Matthew located spoons. Eli lifted the heavy pot from the stove while Evelyn ladled stew, thick with venison, potatoes, carrots, onions. Real food, more than she'd been able to provide in weeks. They sat at the table together, Grace in Evelyn's lap, the others crowded close. For the first few minutes, the only sounds were spoons scraping bowls and quiet chewing. Then Eli spoke. Do you trust him? Evelyn considered the question. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the barn where Reed had gone. I don't know him well enough to trust him, she said honestly, but I believe he meant what he said about tonight. We're safe here, at least until morning. And after morning? After morning, we figure out what comes next. She smoothed Grace's hair, feeling the weight of 6 lives depending on her choices. One step at a time, Eli. That's all we can do. They finished eating in silence. Evelyn found herself studying the house, the details a man's daily life left behind, books on the shelf, well-worn, a rifle above the door, clean and oiled, work gloves by the hearth, everything in its place, but nothing that spoke of family. No photographs, no feminine touches, no signs that anyone but Reed had ever lived here. A solitary man, a scarred man, a man who walked into an auction and spent $70 on strangers. The pieces didn't fit together in any pattern that made sense. After dinner, Evelyn explored the upstairs. 3 bedrooms, 2 with beds, one that looked like storage. The larger bedroom had a bed big enough for her and the 3 youngest. The smaller room held 2 narrow beds the older boys could use, which left no bed for Reed. She returned downstairs to find him entering through the kitchen door, bringing cold air and the smell of hay. Upstairs is set? He asked. Yes, but there's no... Where do you sleep? Barn has a cot. I'll be fine. This is your house. And you're a woman alone with 6 children in a strange place. Reed hung his coat on the peg. You think I'm fool enough to believe you'll rest easy with me under the same roof tonight? Barn's warm. I've slept in worse. The consideration in that statement made Evelyn's throat tighten. Thank you. He nodded. Get everyone settled. Morning comes early on a ranch. Mr. Callahan. Evelyn stopped him before he could leave again. Why did you really do this? Please, I need to understand. Reed was quiet for a long moment. The firelight caught the scar, making it look fresh. When he spoke, his voice was low. 6 years ago, I was in a Union prison camp, Andersonville. You heard of it? Evelyn nodded. Everyone had heard of Andersonville. I watched men die there, hundreds of them, starved, sick, beaten. And you know what the worst part was? His eyes were distant, seeing something she couldn't. Wasn't the dying. Was the way men stopped being men. How fast we all became just numbers. Just things to be managed and processed and disposed of. He paused, jaw working like the words were hard to shape. Last month before the war ended, there was a moment, brief thing, just a few seconds, where I could have run, make it to the wire, maybe even past it. But there was a boy next to me. Couldn't have been more than 15, lied about his age to enlist. He was dying of fever, out of his head. If I ran, I'd have left him. What did you do? Stayed, held his hand while he died, missed my chance. Reed's hand rose to his scar again. Guard saw me almost go, though. Decided to make an example. This is what I got for thinking about running. The room was very quiet. Even the children had stopped moving to listen. So when I saw you on that platform, Reed continued, when I heard them bidding on your children like they were cattle, I saw that boy's face. Saw every face from that camp, and I thought, not today. Not if I have $70 to stop it. He met Evelyn's eyes. That's why. No hidden agenda. No debt you owe me. I did it because someone should have done it for that boy, and nobody did. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Your kindness is not kindness. It's just what should be done. He moved toward the door. Get some sleep, Mrs. Hart. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. Then he was gone into the night, and Evelyn was left standing in the warm kitchen with her children gathered around her, and a mystery of a man sleeping in a barn because he thought it would make her feel safer. Mama? Rebecca tugged her sleeve. Is he a good man? Evelyn looked down at her daughter's upturned face. I think he might be, sweetheart. I really think he might be. They climbed the stairs together. Evelyn tucked the younger children into bed, Grace and Rebecca and the twins, all piled together like puppies seeking warmth. Eli and Matthew took the second room. Through the walls, she could hear them whispering, processing the impossible day. Evelyn sat by the window in her room, looking out at the barn where lamplight still glowed. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Somewhere in Bitter Creek, Calvin was planning his next move. Somewhere in this house, 6 children were trying to understand what came next. And in the barn, a scarred stranger who'd paid $70 for their freedom was sleeping on a cot because he knew what it meant to be property. Tomorrow would bring questions, decisions, the hard work of figuring out how 7 people with nothing could build something from the ruins Calvin had created. But tonight, for the first time in longer than Evelyn could remember, her children were warm and fed and safe. It would have to be enough. She undressed quietly and climbed into bed beside Grace's small sleeping form. The mattress was comfortable. The quilts were heavy. The house creaked in the wind but held firm. Evelyn closed her eyes and, despite everything, slept. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Evelyn woke disoriented, forgetting for a moment where she was. Then Grace's warm weight against her side registered, and the events of yesterday crashed back. The auction, the stranger, the ranch house that wasn't hers but had sheltered them anyway. She rose quietly, not wanting to wake the children, and descended the stairs. Through the kitchen window she could see Reed crossing from the barn, his breath-forming clouds in the early light. He'd already been up for hours by the look of it, his coat dusted with hay, his movements carrying the efficiency of completed tasks. The front door opened. Reed stopped short when he saw her. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. "You didn't. I'm an early riser." Evelyn gestured toward the stove where bacon sizzled in a cast-iron pan. "You've already started breakfast." "Habit. Make enough for everyone. There's eggs and bread, too." He hung his coat and moved to the wash basin, scrubbing his hands. "Children sleep all right?" "Better than they have in weeks." Evelyn watched him work soap between his fingers with the same careful precision he'd shown counting coins yesterday. "Mr. Callahan, we need to talk about arrangements." "We do. But let's get everyone fed first." He dried his hands on a towel. "Clear heads make better plans." The children emerged gradually, drawn by food smells and the murmur of voices. Matthew first, then Eli, then the younger ones in a sleepy cluster. They moved with the wariness of the previous night, but hunger won over caution. Soon they were all seated around the table again, plates filled with more food than Evelyn had been able to provide in months. Reed ate standing by the counter, giving them space. Evelyn noticed he kept his scarred side turned slightly away from the children, not hiding it exactly, but not forcing them to look at it either. A man conscious of how he appeared to young eyes. After breakfast, Reed sent the children to explore the barn under Eli's supervision. Just looking, not touching, he instructed. There's barn cats with kittens in the loft if you're careful. The children scattered, even Eli's wariness overcome by the promise of kittens. When the door closed behind them, Reed turned to Evelyn. Now we talk. They sat across from each other at the table. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes and the worry lines around Evelyn's eyes. Reed folded his hands on the scarred wood surface. You want to know what I expect from you, he said. Fair question. Here's my answer. Nothing you're not willing to give freely. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Men don't spend $70 on nothing. I spent $70 getting you away from Calvin Hart and that auction block. That's done. Money's gone. I'm not looking to recoup it through your labor or your... He paused, choosing words carefully. Through anything else you might be worried about. Then what do you want? Reed was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing a knot in the table's wood grain. Honestly, I want to know you and those children aren't going to end up back in that situation. But what happens next is your choice, not mine. My choice. Evelyn heard the bitterness in her own voice. I have no money, no property, no legal standing. What choices do I have? More than you think. Reed stood and crossed to a shelf, returning with a folded paper, the receipt from yesterday's auction. He set it on the table between them. This document says I purchased you and your children to satisfy Calvin's debt claim. Legally, you're bound to me for the amount owed plus interest, or until I release the obligation. Evelyn's heart sank. So it's indentured servitude. It's leverage. Reed pushed the paper toward her. Take it. It's yours. She stared at him. What? The receipt. Take it. Burn it if you want. I won't enforce it. You're free to leave any time. Today, tomorrow, whenever you choose. But while you're here, that paper protects you. Anyone asks who has legal custody of your family, the answer is me. Not Calvin, not the court. Me. And I'm saying you're free. Evelyn's hands trembled as she picked up the document. The ink was fresh, Reed's signature bold across the bottom. $70. 6 lives. A transaction that should have made her property now being offered back as protection. Why would you do this? Because you're not property. You're a woman trying to protect her children. Reed sat back down. Now, here's what I'm offering. You can stay here as long as you need to. There's room, there's food, ranch work needs doing, and I could use help. But that's employment if you choose it, not obligation. You want to contribute, we'll work out fair wages. You want to make other arrangements, I'll help however I can. And if I choose to leave today, then I'll hitch the wagon and drive you wherever you want to go. His gray eyes were steady. But I'll be honest, where would you go? Back to Bitter Creek, where Calvin controls half the town. To another territory where you'd be 7 mouths looking for work in February? Evelyn closed her eyes. He was right. Leaving meant walking back into the same impossible situation, just in a different location. So my real choice is stay here or starve elsewhere. Your real choice is accept help or refuse it. Reed's voice held no judgment. Pride's important, I understand that. But your children need stability more than you need to prove you don't need anyone. The words landed like a physical blow because they were true. Evelyn had been running on pride and desperation for months, trying to be strong enough for 7 people. It hadn't worked. Pride didn't fill stomachs or pay rent or stop men from putting children on auction blocks. If we stay, she said slowly, what would employment look like? House needs keeping. Meals need cooking. I've been managing alone but poorly. Garden needs planning for spring. Chickens need tending. Mending, preserving, all the work that makes a ranch function. He paused. It's real work, Mrs. Hart. I'm not inventing tasks to make you feel useful, and it's work I'll pay fairly for. How much? $20 a month plus room and board for the family. That fair? Evelyn's breath caught. $20 was more than she'd made in 3 months of taking in mending. That's too much. It's what the work's worth. Reed's expression didn't change. You think I'm being charitable. I'm not. I'm being practical. A well-run household is worth paying for. And the children? Children should be children. Let them help with age-appropriate chores if they want to contribute, but I'm not employing them. They should be learning, playing, being young while they still can. Evelyn looked down at the receipt in her hands. The paper felt like a test, or maybe a gift. She'd spent so long fighting that accepting help felt like surrender. But maybe surrender wasn't always defeat. Maybe sometimes it was survival. 1 month, she said finally. I'll stay 1 month. Work for wages. See how it goes. Reed nodded. 1 month. But Mrs. Hart, Evelyn, if we're going to be working together, use my name. Evelyn, he tested the word. I need you to understand something. I didn't bring you here to fix you or save you. You're not broken. You're not a charity case. You're a capable woman who got dealt a bad hand by a corrupt man. All I'm offering is space to catch your breath and figure out your next move. And what's your next move? The question hung in the air. Outside, children's laughter drifted from the barn. Reed's gaze moved to the window, watching them through the glass. Stay alive. Keep the ranch running. Maybe help some folks along the way. He looked back at her. Same as anyone, I suppose. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He stood, picking up his hat. I need to check fence lines in the north pasture. Storm last week knocked some posts loose. You and the children settle in however you're comfortable. Anything you need, take it. Food, supplies, whatever. This is your home now, at least for a month. He was halfway to the door when Evelyn spoke again. Reed. Using his first name felt strange on her tongue. Thank you. For yesterday? For today. For not making this harder than it has to be. He turned and something in his expression softened. You've had enough hard, Evelyn. Seems to me you're due some easy. Then he was gone, and Evelyn was alone with a receipt that said she belonged to someone but didn't, in a house that wasn't hers but was, with choices that felt like traps but might be doors. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her dress pocket. Then she stood and began washing breakfast dishes, because that was something she knew how to do, something concrete and useful in a world that had become incomprehensibly strange. The children returned an hour later, faces flushed with cold and excitement. Grace had somehow acquired a tiny gray kitten that mewed pitifully in her arms. Mama, can we keep him? Rebecca pleaded. Please? He's so small and he needs us. Evelyn looked at the kitten, scrawny thing, probably the runt of the litter. In her old life, another mouth to feed would have been impossible. But this wasn't her old life anymore. Ask Mr. Callahan when he returns. It's his barn. He said we could, Eli interjected. The mama cat has 6 kittens. He said 1 less wouldn't hurt, long as we take care of it proper. 6 kittens for 6 children. Evelyn wondered if Reed had planned that, or if it was just coincidence. Over the next few days, a rhythm established itself. Reed rose before dawn to tend livestock and ranch work. Evelyn managed the house, cooking, cleaning, organizing spaces that had functioned but not thrived under a single man's care. The children explored within boundaries Reed set, learning the ranch's geography and routines. Eli shadowed Reed whenever allowed, soaking up knowledge about horses and cattle and land management. Matthew discovered Reed's small collection of books and spent hours reading by the fire. The twins helped Evelyn in the kitchen, their identical faces serious with concentration as they learned to knead bread. Rebecca appointed herself keeper of chickens, naming each hen and collecting eggs with reverent care. Grace toddled after everyone, her kitten, dubbed Snowball, despite being gray, clutched in her chubby arms. They were careful around each other, all of them. Polite, cautious. Reed gave them space. Evelyn gave him the same. Conversations stayed surface level, focused on tasks and necessities. Neither pushed for more. On the 4th day, a rider appeared. Evelyn was hanging laundry when she saw the horse crest the ridge. Her hand stilled on the clothesline. Riders meant news, and news was rarely good. Reed emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. He'd been repairing tack. The rider drew closer, resolving into a young man in a deputy's badge. Reed Callahan? The deputy's voice carried across the yard. That's me. Got a message from town. Judge wants to see you. Something about that auction purchase. Evelyn's blood went cold. She moved toward them without thinking, laundry forgotten. What kind of something? Reed's tone stayed level. Didn't say exactly, just that Calvin Hart filed a complaint, claims irregularities in the sale. The deputy's gaze shifted to Evelyn, then away. Judge wants everyone involved present tomorrow at 10. We'll be there. Reed's voice held no emotion. The deputy nodded and turned his horse back toward town. They watched him disappear over the ridge before either spoke. "It's Calvin," Evelyn said. "He's not going to let this go." "No, he's not." Reed's jaw was set. "Go inside, get the children together. We need to talk." They gathered in the main room. 7 faces turned toward Reed with varying degrees of understanding. Grace played with Snowball, oblivious. The others knew something was wrong. Reed stood by the fireplace, choosing words carefully. "Tomorrow, we go back to Bitter Creek. Judge wants to review the auction. Calvin's claiming something wasn't right about how it went." "He's going to try to take us back," Eli said flatly. "He's going to try. Won't succeed, but he'll try." "How do you know he won't succeed?" Evelyn heard the fear in her own voice. Reed met her eyes. "Because the law says I bought you fair and square. Receipts legal. Money changed hands properly. Judge can review it all day, won't change the facts." "But Calvin owns that judge," Matthew interjected. "Everyone knows." "Influences, maybe. Doesn't own." Reed's tone stayed firm. "And even a corrupt judge has to follow procedure when there's scrutiny. We walk in there with our papers in order, our story straight, and we show them there's nothing irregular to find." "What if that's not enough?" Evelyn asked. Reed was quiet for a long moment. "Then we figure out what comes next, but we don't surrender before the fight starts." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness listening to her children breathe, thinking about tomorrow, about judges and papers and men who decided other people's fates, about Calvin's smirk and the auction block and how easily everything could collapse again. Near midnight, she gave up on rest and went downstairs. She was surprised to find Reed at the table, lamplight illuminating papers spread before him. The auction receipt, the debt claim, documents she didn't recognize. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. "Too much thinking." Evelyn sat across from him. "What are those?" "Property deeds, tax records, Calvin's lumber mill incorporation papers." Reed tapped one document. "Been doing some research since that deputy left." "Research on what?" "On Calvin Hart, his business dealings, his legal standing." Reed's finger traced a line of text. "Man wants to play games with the law. I want to know what rules he's breaking." Evelyn leaned forward. "What did you find?" "Nothing definitive yet, but his mill's been expanding fast, bought 3 competitors in 2 years. That takes capital he shouldn't have, given his declared income." But Reed shuffled papers. "Makes me wonder where the money's coming from." "You think he's doing something illegal?" "I think men who forge debt papers don't usually stop at one crime." He looked up at her. "Tomorrow, whatever happens, I need you to stay calm. Don't let Calvin provoke you. Don't give the judge any reason to question your judgment." "I'm not the one on trial here." "Everyone's always on trial when they're poor and desperate." Reed's voice held bitter experience. "The question is whether the judge sees a capable mother or a woman who can't care for her children. How you present yourself matters." Evelyn's spine straightened. "I know how to present myself." "I know you do, just reminding you to use it." He gathered the papers. "Get some rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow we go to war with paperwork." She returned to bed but didn't sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness planning. What she'd wear, what she'd say, how she'd stand. Reed was right. Presentation mattered. Perception mattered. She'd been sold on an auction block 4 days ago. Tomorrow she had to convince a judge she didn't belong there. Morning came too fast. Reed hitched the wagon while Evelyn dressed the children in their best clothes, threadbare but clean, carefully mended. She wore her only good dress, the black one from Thomas's funeral, appropriate for a widow. Respectable. They rode toward Bitter Creek in tense silence. The children understood the weight of what was coming, even if they didn't grasp the details. Even Grace seemed subdued, clutching Snowball in her lap. The town materialized through morning mist. Evelyn's stomach clenched at the sight of the square where the auction had been held. The platform was gone, but she could still see it in her mind, could still feel the rough wood under her feet, the cold wind, the crowd's jeers. Reed drove past the square to the land office, where the judge held court. A small crowd had already gathered, townspeople drawn by gossip, Calvin's supporters, come to watch the show. Evelyn recognized faces. The grocer, the seamstress, the banker, all watching as Reed helped her down from the wagon. Head high, Reed murmured. You've done nothing wrong. They entered the land office together. Inside, the room had been rearranged into a makeshift courtroom. A desk at the front for the judge, chairs for interested parties, standing room for everyone else. Calvin stood near the front, his lawyer beside him, a thin man with spectacles and an expression of professional boredom. The judge entered, a heavy-set man named Morrison who'd ruled on the original debt claim. He settled behind the desk and banged a wooden gavel. This hearing concerns the auction of 1 Evelyn Hart and 6 minor children, sold to satisfy debt claimed by Calvin Hart, purchased by Reed Callahan for $70. Morrison's voice was matter-of-fact. Calvin Hart has filed a complaint alleging irregularities. Mr. Hart, present your case. Calvin's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client contends that the auction was conducted improperly. Specifically, that Mr. Callahan's bid violated the spirit of debt collection by purchasing the entire family unit rather than allowing separation that would have maximized return. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. They were arguing she should have been sold piece by piece. Additionally, the lawyer continued, my client questions whether Mr. Callahan had legitimate intent to utilize the purchased labor or whether this was an attempt to interfere with lawful debt collection. Judge Morrison looked at Reed. Mr. Callahan, you want to respond. Reed stood. He'd worn his best coat, his hair combed back, his scarred face clean-shaven. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of a man stating facts. Your Honor, I attended a legal auction. I made a legal bid. I paid legal currency. The auctioneer accepted. I have a receipt proving the transaction. Nothing about that process was irregular. The spirit of the law, the lawyer began. The spirit of the law doesn't override the letter of it, Reed interrupted. You can't auction people off and then complain when someone bids more than you wanted. That's not irregularity, that's just losing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Morrison raised a hand for silence. Mr. Hart's complaint also questions your intent. Do you or do you not intend to employ Mrs. Hart and her children? I employ Mrs. Hart as housekeeper for fair wages. The children are her dependents, not my employees, all legal and proper. And your payment of $70, some might say that's excessive for a housekeeper. Some might say that's none of their business. Reed's tone hardened slightly. I paid what I thought the family was worth as a unit. That's my right as a bidder. Calvin stepped forward, his face flushed. This is ridiculous. He didn't buy them to work them. He bought them to spite me. Is spite illegal now? Reed turned to face Calvin directly. You put that woman and those children on an auction block. You invited bids. I bid higher than anyone else. You got your $70. The debt you claimed is satisfied. What exactly are you complaining about? I'm complaining that you interfered with what? Your plan to see those children separated and sold off individual? Your plan to punish your brother's widow for not marrying you when he died? Reed's voice cut like a blade. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it, Calvin? Evelyn refused you, so you invented a debt to break her. The room went silent. Evelyn stared at Reed, then at Calvin. She'd never told anyone about Calvin's proposal 3 weeks after Thomas's funeral. The offer to marry him, take care of her financial troubles, let him run Thomas's land. The offer she'd refused because his eyes held nothing but calculation and the memory of Thomas was too fresh. Calvin's face went from flushed to pale. You can't prove... Can't I? Reed pulled a folded paper from his pocket. This is the original debt claim you filed, dated November 3rd. Know what else happened November 3rd? Silence. That's the day after Evelyn Hart refused your marriage proposal, witnessed by at least 3 people at the boarding house. Reed's gaze swept the room. Anyone here think that's coincidence? Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Hart, is this true? It's irrelevant, Calvin's lawyer interjected. My client's personal feelings don't invalidate a legal debt. No, but they establish motive for fraud. Reed set another paper on the judge's desk. This is Thomas Hart's actual financial records. No loan, no debt. The signature on your claim is forged. You can't prove that, Calvin said, but his voice wavered. I can prove the notary who supposedly witnessed it was dead 2 months before the date on the paper. Reed's eyes were cold. Want to explain how a dead man notarized your document? The room erupted. Judge Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Evelyn sat frozen, watching Calvin's face cycle through emotions. Shock, rage, fear. Reed had done this. Somehow, in 4 days, he'd found what she couldn't find in weeks. Morrison finally restored quiet. Mr. Hart, these are serious allegations. Do you have explanation for the notary discrepancy? Calvin's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, Calvin spoke, his voice tight. There must be some mistake in the dates. I'll need to review my records. You do that? Morrison's expression had shifted from bored to interested. Until then, I'm suspending enforcement of the debt claim pending investigation. Mr. Callahan's purchase stands as legal. Mrs. Hart and her children remain under his custody by law until this matter is resolved. Your Honor, Calvin started. We're done here. Morrison stood. Next hearing in 2 weeks. Come with better evidence or don't come at all. The gavel fell with finality. Evelyn couldn't move. Around her, people stood, talking in excited whispers. Reed touched her shoulder gently. We should go, he said quietly. She let him guide her outside. The children waited by the wagon, Eli's face tight with worry. Reed helped everyone in without speaking. Only when they were clear of town, halfway home, did Evelyn find her voice. How did you know? About Calvin's proposal. About the notary. About all of it. Reed kept his eyes on the road. I asked questions, listened to gossip, checked public records. The notary information is in the county death register. Anyone could have found it if they looked. But no one did look. Because no one cared enough to try. He glanced at her. You're not just some widow to me, Evelyn. You're a person who deserves truth, seemed worth the effort to find it. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of the children. What happens in 2 weeks? Calvin either proves his claim is legitimate, which he can't, or the judge dismisses it entirely. Reed's voice was certain. Either way, you're free. The debt is dead. And us? The purchase? Legally binding until you choose otherwise. You want that receipt back, it's yours. You want to stay and work? The offer stands. You want to leave and start fresh somewhere else? I'll help arrange it. He met her eyes briefly. Your choice, Evelyn. Always your choice. The wagon rolled through the afternoon, carrying them back to the ranch, back to a place that was becoming, impossibly, something like home. Evelyn watched the landscape pass and thought about choices, about freedom, about a scarred man who'd spent $70 and countless hours proving that 1 widow and 6 children mattered. She didn't have answers yet, but for the first time since Thomas died, she had time to find them. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift anyone had given her. The relief lasted 3 days. 3 days of cautious hope, of children laughing more freely, of Evelyn allowing herself to believe the nightmare might actually end. Then the sheriff arrived with a new summons, and the fragile peace shattered like creek ice in spring. Reed was mending fence when the rider appeared. Evelyn saw him from the kitchen window, saw Reed's posture stiffen, saw the envelope change hands, saw the sheriff gesture back toward town with words she couldn't hear but could imagine. When Reed returned to the house, his face was carved from stone. What is it? Evelyn's hand stilled on the bread dough she'd been kneading. Calvin filed an appeal. Claims he has new evidence proving the debt is legitimate. Reed set the envelope on the table. Judge scheduled a hearing for tomorrow morning. Says all parties must appear or forfeit their claim. What new evidence could he possibly have? Doesn't say, but it doesn't matter. Reed's jaw tightened. Real or fabricated, he's dragging this out, making it expensive, making it exhausting, hoping we'll give up. Evelyn wiped flour from her hands, her mind already racing. We don't give up. No, we don't. Reed met her eyes. But we need to be smart about this. If Calvin's willing to forge 1 document, he's willing to forge more. We need proof he can't argue away. What kind of proof? Reed was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against the table. The kind that's in Calvin's house. The real will, The original land deeds. Thomas's actual financial records before Calvin got his hands on them. Those would be locked up. Hidden. Probably, but not impossible to find if someone knew where to look. The implication hung in the air between them. Evelyn's pulse quickened. You're talking about breaking into his house. I'm talking about retrieving stolen property. Reed's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Those documents belong to you. Calvin took them. We'd just be taking them back. That's still breaking and entering. If we're caught, we're no worse off than we are now. But if we succeed, we end this. He leaned forward. Evelyn, I can fight Calvin in court all day with the evidence we have. But judges can be bought, witnesses can be intimidated, and legal battles can drag on for years. Your children don't have years. They need this settled. Evelyn looked toward the stairs where the children were playing, their voices drifting down. Eli teaching Matthew chess, the twins singing to Rebecca, Grace giggling at Snowball's antics. Normal sounds, childhood sounds. The sounds of a life they deserved but couldn't have while Calvin's shadow hung over them. When? She asked. Tonight. Calvin attends lodge meetings every Thursday, leaves at 7, returns around 11. His wife usually retires early. Reed's words came with the precision of someone who'd already thought this through. We ride in after dark, search the house, get out before he returns. We? Evelyn heard the surprise in her own voice. You know what we're looking for better than I do. Thomas's handwriting, his papers, what belongs and what doesn't. Reed's gaze was steady. I can get us in and out, but finding the right documents, that's your expertise. Fear and determination warred in Evelyn's chest. Breaking into Calvin's house was dangerous, possibly criminal, definitely reckless. But Reed was right about one thing. They needed evidence Calvin couldn't refute, and that evidence was in his possession. What about the children? I'll ask the widow Hanson from the neighboring ranch to stay with them. She's trustworthy, discreet, won't ask questions. Reed stood. You don't have to do this, Evelyn. I can go alone. No. The word came out stronger than she expected. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. Something shifted in Reed's expression, respect maybe, or recognition. Then we leave at 8. Dress dark, bring gloves. The hours until evening crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn went through the motions of normal routine, finishing bread, mending clothes, helping Rebecca collect eggs. But her mind was elsewhere, planning, worrying, imagining everything that could go wrong. Reed left before dinner to fetch Mrs. Hanson, returning with a gray-haired woman who asked no questions and simply settled into the rocking chair with her knitting. The children accepted her presence with the easy adaptability of youth, already absorbed in their evening activities. At 8 o'clock, Reed and Evelyn slipped out the kitchen door into February darkness. 2 horses waited, already saddled. Reed had changed into dark clothing, his face shadowed beneath a low-pulled hat. Evelyn wore her darkest dress with a shawl that covered her hair. They rode in silence, following back trails that skirted the main road. The night was moonless, clouds obscuring the stars. Cold bit through Evelyn's layers, but she barely felt it. Her entire focus narrowed to what lay ahead. Bitter Creek appeared as scattered lamplight in the valley below. Reed guided them to the edge of town, then dismounted and tied the horses in a grove of cottonwoods. From here we walk, he said quietly. Stay close. Step where I step. They moved through the darkness like shadows, avoiding main streets, keeping to alleys and empty lots. Calvin's house sat on the prosperous end of town, a 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and fancy gingerbread trim. Lamplight glowed in the front windows, but the back of the house was dark. Reed led them around to the rear entrance. He tried the door handle, locked as expected. From his pocket he produced 2 thin metal tools. Evelyn watched as he worked the lock with practiced efficiency. Where did you learn to do that? She whispered. Prison camp. Man named Jackie taught me. Said every skill has value if you survive long enough to use it. The lock clicked open. Guess he was right. They slipped inside into what proved to be a mudroom. Beyond it, a hallway stretched toward the front of the house. Evelyn could hear voices, a woman's, probably Calvin's wife Martha, speaking to someone. A servant, maybe. Reed touched Evelyn's arm and pointed upward. The study would be on the 2nd floor overlooking the street. That's where men like Calvin kept important papers. They climbed the back stairs with agonizing care, each step a potential betrayal. The second-floor hallway was dark except for a sliver of light beneath one door. Reed tested the first door they came to, a bedroom, empty. The second was a sewing room. The third, finally, was the study. Inside, Reed closed the door and struck a match, shielding the flame with his hand. In the brief light, Evelyn saw what they were up against. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface covered with papers. Filing cabinets lined one wall, bookshelves another. Searching this space thoroughly would take hours they didn't have. Where would he keep the most important documents? Reed whispered as the match died. Evelyn thought of Thomas, of how he'd organized their own modest papers. Desk, bottom drawer, probably locked. That's where men keep things they don't want found. Reed struck another match and moved to the desk. Sure enough, the bottom drawer was locked. He produced his tools again and went to work while Evelyn kept watch at the door, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it could be heard downstairs. The lock clicked. Reed pulled the drawer open as the match burned down to his fingers. He cursed softly and lit another. Inside the drawer, a metal box, also locked. "This is it," Reed murmured. "Whatever he's hiding, it's in here." He worked the box's lock while Evelyn's nerves stretched tighter with each passing second. Downstairs, footsteps moved through the house. A door closed, the servant leaving for the night perhaps, or Martha retiring upstairs. The box lock gave way. Reed lifted the lid, and even in the match's dim light, Evelyn recognized what she was seeing: Thomas's handwriting, his signature, documents she'd never seen before but knew instantly were real. "The will," she breathed, reaching for a folded paper. "Thomas's actual will. It leaves everything to me and the children, no mention of Calvin anywhere." Reed grabbed more papers. "Land deeds. All in Thomas's name, transferred to you upon his death. And look," he held up a ledger. "Financial records. No loans, no debts. Everything Thomas told you was true." Evelyn's hands trembled as she sorted through the box. Here was the proof they needed, the truth Calvin had buried. But there was more. Letters between Calvin and a lawyer in Cheyenne, discussing how to manufacture a debt claim. Correspondence with the corrupt notary before his death, arranging for backdated signatures. A complete paper trail of fraud. "We need to take all of this," Reed said. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. They froze. The match went out, plunging them into darkness. Evelyn's breath stopped in her chest. Footsteps approached the study door. Reed moved with silent speed, gathering papers and shoving them inside his coat. Evelyn closed the metal box as quietly as she could and pushed the drawer shut. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then a woman's voice, Martha's, called out. "James, is that you?" A man's voice answered from downstairs. "Yes, ma'am. Just checking the windows before I head home." "Lock up when you're done." "Yes, ma'am." The footsteps retreated. Evelyn released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Reed touched her arm, gesturing toward the door. They needed to leave. Now. They slipped back into the hallway, moving toward the rear stairs. Behind them, they heard the servant moving through the first floor, checking locks as promised. If he came upstairs, if he noticed the study door they'd left slightly ajar. They reached the stairs and descended as quickly as silence allowed. The mudroom door was still unlocked, thank heaven. They stepped outside into the cold night air, and Evelyn had never been so grateful for darkness and winter wind. They were halfway across the backyard when light flooded the house behind them. "Stop right there!" Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She spun to see Martha in the doorway, a lamp in one hand and a pistol in the other. Behind her, the servant appeared, his face shocked. "I knew someone was in the house," Martha said, her voice shaking but her gun hand steady. "James, fetch the sheriff. These two aren't going anywhere." Reed's hand moved toward his own gun, but Evelyn caught his wrist. A gunfight would wake the whole street, and they'd never escape. They needed another way out. "Martha." Evelyn stepped forward, hands raised. "We're not here to hurt anyone. You're trespassing, breaking and entering." Martha's eyes were wild. "Calvin will, when Calvin finds out we took back what he stole?" Evelyn's voice was sharp. "The real will he hid? The forged documents he created? The proof that he's been committing fraud?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Yes, you do. Evelyn took another step forward. You knew, didn't you? You knew Thomas never borrowed money from Calvin. You knew the debt was a lie. Martha's composure cracked slightly. That's not, Calvin said. Calvin said whatever he needed to say to get what he wanted. My husband's land, his property, his revenge for me refusing to marry him. Evelyn's words came faster now, pressing the advantage. But you knew. I can see it in your face. You knew what he was doing. It doesn't matter what I knew. But Martha's voice wavered. You broke into our home to retrieve stolen property, property that belongs to me by law and by right. Evelyn gestured to Reed. We have the papers now, the real ones. And tomorrow we're taking them to the judge. Calvin's fraud will be exposed. His reputation will be destroyed. And you, she paused, letting the implication hang. You'll be tied to it. The wife who knew, who helped, who covered for him. I never helped him, Martha said, but the denial was weak. Then help yourself now. Evelyn's voice softened. Let us go. Tell Calvin you heard noises but found nothing. In the morning, when the truth comes out, you can claim ignorance. Say you never knew what he was doing. Protect yourself, Martha, because Calvin won't protect you when this all falls apart. The gun in Martha's hand lowered slightly. Evelyn could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing loyalty against self-preservation, pride against survival. Martha had married Calvin for security, for status. But that status wouldn't survive the scandal of fraud and forgery. You really have proof? Martha asked quietly. We have everything. Letters, ledgers, the forged debt claim with the dead notary's signature. Reed's voice was calm. Calvin built a house of cards, Mrs. Hart, and it's about to fall. Martha looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked at James, still standing behind her. Finally, she lowered the gun completely. I heard noises, she said slowly. Thought it was cats in the yard. James checked. Found nothing. That's the story. That's the story, Evelyn confirmed. Martha stepped back inside and closed the door. The lamp's light disappeared, leaving them in darkness again. They didn't wait to see if she'd change her mind. They ran. Through the yard, down the alley, into the cottonwood grove where the horses waited. They mounted and rode hard, putting distance between themselves and Bitter Creek as fast as the darkness allowed. Only when they were halfway home did Reed slow the horses to a walk. That was too close, he said. But we got what we needed. Evelyn patted the papers tucked inside her coat. We got everything. You were brilliant back there. The way you turned Martha. I've never seen anything like it. I just told her the truth. That Calvin was going down and she could drown with him or save herself. Evelyn's hands were still shaking from adrenaline. She chose herself. Most people do when it matters. They rode in silence for a while, the reality of what they'd done settling over them. They'd committed burglary, broken into a home, stolen property, even if that property was rightfully Evelyn's to begin with. If Martha changed her mind, if she told Calvin the truth, they could both end up in jail. But they had the documents, the proof, the truth that Calvin had tried to bury. What do we do now? Evelyn asked. Now we go home, get a few hours of sleep. And in the morning, Reed's voice hardened. In the morning, we end this. They arrived back at the ranch near midnight. Mrs. Hanson was dozing in the rocking chair, her knitting in her lap. She woke as they entered, took one look at their faces, and simply nodded. Children slept fine, she said. I'll be on my way. Reed walked her home while Evelyn climbed the stairs to check on her sleeping children. They were exactly where they should be. Grace curled with Snowball, Rebecca, and the twins in a tangle of limbs, the boys in their room with chess pieces still scattered on the floor between their beds. Safe. Whole. Unaware of the risks their mother had just taken. Evelyn returned downstairs to find Reed at the table, the stolen documents spread before him. He'd lit every lamp in the house, flooding the room with light. We need to organize these, he said. Present them in a way the judge can't ignore. They worked through the night, sorting papers into categories. The real will in one stack. Land deeds in another. Financial records showing no debt. The damning correspondence between Calvin and his co-conspirators. By the time dawn broke, They had a complete narrative of fraud laid out in chronological order. Evelyn made coffee while Reed penned a detailed summary. Her eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but her mind was sharp. Today would decide everything. Either the judge would see the truth or Calvin's influence would prevail despite the evidence. "You should wake the children," Reed said. "Get them dressed. We all need to be there for this." Even Grace. Especially Grace. The judge needs to see what Calvin was trying to destroy, needs to see the family he tried to break apart. Reed met her eyes. Truth matters, but sometimes emotion matters too. An hour later, they were on the road to Bitter Creek again. The children were quiet, sensing the importance of the day. Eli sat beside Reed on the driver's bench, his young face set with determination. Evelyn held Grace and tried not to think about what failure would mean. The courthouse was more crowded than before. Word had spread that something significant was happening. Calvin was already there, his lawyer beside him, his face confident. Martha sat in the back row, her eyes not meeting anyone's. Judge Morrison took his seat and banged the gavel. "Let's proceed. Mr. Hart, you filed an appeal claiming new evidence. Present it." Calvin's lawyer stood and began a rehearsed speech about documents that supposedly proved Thomas had been reckless with money, had made bad investments, had secretly borrowed from Calvin and lied to his wife about it. The lies were smooth, professional, almost believable. Then it was Reed's turn. He stood and placed the metal box on the judge's desk with a heavy thunk. "Your Honor, I have the actual evidence. Not claims, not speculation, actual documents." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Where did you get this?" "From Calvin Hart's house, where he'd hidden it after stealing it from Mrs. Hart following her husband's death." The courtroom erupted. Calvin shot to his feet. "That's theft! Breaking and entering! You can't use stolen property as evidence?" Reed's voice cut through the noise. "You mean like the forged debt claim you created using a dead man's signature?" Morrison banged his gavel. "Order! Everyone sit down!" He looked at Reed. "These are serious allegations on both sides. What exactly do you have?" Reed began pulling documents from the box. Thomas Hart's real will, properly notarized and dated, leaves everything to his wife and children with no mention of Calvin Hart. Land deeds showing Thomas owned his property free and clear. Financial ledgers showing no debt to anyone, let alone Calvin. He laid each document on the desk as he spoke, building a mountain of evidence. And most importantly, Reed produced the letters. Correspondence between Calvin Hart and a lawyer named Sherman Webb discussing how to manufacture a debt claim. Letters to the notary, arranging for backdated signatures. A complete conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Hart of her legal inheritance. The judge picked up the letters, reading them with an expression that grew darker with each page. Calvin's face had gone from confident to ashen. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Calvin waved him off. "Your Honor," Calvin said, his voice strained. "Those documents were taken illegally. They can't be admitted as evidence." Morrison looked up from the letters. "Mr. Hart, these letters describe in detail how you forged a debt claim, how you bribed a notary, how you conspired to steal a widow's property." He set the papers down carefully. "And you want me to ignore them because of how they were obtained?" The law says I have discretion in what evidence to consider, and I'm exercising that discretion." Morrison's voice was iron. "Mr. Callahan, where exactly did you find these?" "In a lockbox in Calvin Hart's study, hidden in his desk." "And how did you gain access to his house?" Reed met the judge's eyes steadily. "I broke in, picked the locks, took the box, and left." A bold admission. Evelyn held her breath. Morrison could throw them both in jail for that, could dismiss everything they'd found, no matter how damning. Instead, the judge turned to Calvin. "Mr. Hart, are these your letters?" Calvin's jaw worked. Finally, he said, "I refuse to answer on the grounds it might incriminate me." "I'll take that as a yes." Morrison gathered the documents. "Based on this evidence, I'm making the following rulings. First, the debt claim against Evelyn Hart is dismissed with prejudice. It was fraudulent from the start, and this court will not enforce it." Relief crashed over Evelyn like a wave. Beside her, Eli made a small sound. Grace looked up at her with wide eyes, not understanding, but sensing the shift. "Second," Morrison continued, All property claimed by Calvin Hart as collateral is hereby restored to Evelyn Hart. The land, the house, everything. It's hers by right of Thomas Hart's will, which I'm recognizing as valid and binding. Calvin's lawyer tried to object, but Morrison silenced him with a look. Third, I'm referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor. The evidence suggests multiple criminal acts: fraud, forgery, bribery, conspiracy. Those charges will be pursued. He fixed Calvin with a hard stare. Mr. Hart, you're not under arrest yet, but I suggest you retain criminal counsel. The gavel fell. The courtroom exploded into noise, people shouting, arguing, demanding explanations. Calvin shoved through the crowd toward the door, his face purple with rage. His lawyer scrambled after him. Martha slipped out a side entrance, her expression carefully blank. Evelyn sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. It was over. The debt was gone. The land was hers. Calvin's fraud had been exposed. They'd won. Then small arms wrapped around her waist. Rebecca was crying. Matthew was grinning. The twins were bouncing up and down. Eli stood apart, his eyes wet, trying to maintain his composure. Even Grace seemed to understand something good had happened. Reed appeared beside them, his hand on Eli's shoulder. It's done, he said quietly. You're free. Free. The word felt foreign. Evelyn had been fighting for so long that freedom seemed like a concept for other people. But here it was, real and solid and proven by the judge's ruling. What happens now? She asked, her voice shaking. Now you take your children home. To your real home. On your land. Reed's gray eyes were soft. And you start building the life Calvin tried to take from you. They left the courthouse together, stepping out into winter sunshine. The crowd parted to let them through, some faces hostile, others approving, most just curious. Evelyn walked with her head high, and her children gathered close. The wagon waited where they'd left it. Reed helped everyone in, then climbed to the driver's bench. But instead of heading back to the ranch, he turned the horses toward the edge of town, toward the road that led to the 40 acres Thomas had claimed. Evelyn's heart clenched as the property came into view. The house Thomas built, small but solid, designed for a growing family. The barn he'd raised with neighbors' help. The fence line he'd walked every morning. It had been months since she'd seen it, not since Calvin's men had forced her out. The place looked abandoned. Windows dark. Weeds growing where Thomas's careful garden had been. Snow drifted against the porch. But the bones were good. The structure was sound. It could be home again. Reed stopped the wagon in front of the house. Want to look inside? Evelyn climbed down, the children following. Her hands shook as she pushed open the front door. Inside, dust covered everything. Furniture remained. Calvin hadn't bothered to steal things with no resale value. Thomas's chair by the fireplace, the table where they'd eaten meals, the cradle that had held each baby. It's still here, Matthew said wonderingly. Everything's still here. Evelyn moved through the rooms like a ghost visiting its former life. The bedroom she'd shared with Thomas, the children's room with beds Thomas had built, the kitchen where she'd cooked and canned and dreamed of the future. It could be cleaned, repaired, made into a home again. But the thought of doing it alone, of trying to work the land and raise 6 children without help, made exhaustion settle into her bones. She returned to the main room to find Reed examining the fireplace. Structure's solid, he said. Needs cleaning and some minor repairs, but nothing major. You could move back in within a week if you wanted. I don't know if I want to. The admission surprised her. This was Thomas's dream. His claim, his plan. I don't know if it's mine. Reed turned to face her. What is your dream? Evelyn looked around at the dust and memories. I dreamed of safety, of my children having enough to eat, of not having to choose between pride and survival. She met his eyes. I have that now. At the ranch. With you. The offer to stay still stands for as long as you want. But this land is mine. I should use it somehow. Turn it into something. Could sell it, take the money, invest it somewhere that makes sense for you. The suggestion was practical, but it felt wrong. Thomas had worked too hard for this land, had died believing it would provide for his family. Selling it seemed like betrayal, but keeping it unused seemed like waste. Evelyn walked to the window, looking out at the 40 acres of snow-covered Wyoming. Thomas had chosen this spot for its water access, for the southern exposure, for the shelter of the ridge behind it. Good land, valuable land, land that deserved to be worked. An idea began to form. "What if we combined them?" she said slowly. Reed moved to stand beside her. "Combined what?" "Your ranch and this land. They're adjacent, aren't they? The southern border of your property meets the northern border of mine." She turned to face him. "What if we made it one operation? Bigger, more sustainable, room for cattle and crops, space for the children to grow." "That would be a partnership." "Yes, it would." Evelyn's pulse quickened as the idea took shape. "I contribute the land. You contribute your ranch and knowledge. We work it together. Split the profits, build something neither of us could build alone." Reed was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "That's not a small commitment, Evelyn. Partnerships need trust, need honesty, need both people pulling equal weight." "I know. And it's not just business. Our lives would be tangled up together. The children, the work, the decisions. Everything shared." "I know that too." Evelyn held his gaze. "But I've been thinking about what you said, about how you didn't buy us to fix us or save us, about how I'm capable and just got dealt a bad hand." She paused. "I think maybe we both got dealt bad hands, but together we might have a winning one." Something shifted in Reed's expression. Surprise, maybe, or hope he didn't want to show. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure I don't want to do this alone anymore. And I'm sure that you're the most honorable man I've ever met." Evelyn's voice steadied. "So yes, I'm sure." Reed extended his hand. "Equal partners. Full transparency on finances and decisions. This land and mine worked as one." Evelyn took his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. "Equal partners." They shook on it while her children watched with varying degrees of understanding. Eli's face showed approval. Matthew grinned. The younger ones just seemed happy their mother was smiling. Outside, the winter sun broke through clouds, flooding the room with light. Evelyn looked around the house that had been her prison and her loss, seeing it now as possibility. Not a place to hide, but a resource to use. Not Thomas's dream, but the foundation for something new. "We should head back," Reed said. "Getting late, and there's work to plan." They returned to the wagon and began the journey to the ranch, to home. Because somewhere in the last 10 days, the Callahan Ranch had become home in a way Evelyn hadn't expected. Not because Reed had bought her freedom, but because he'd offered her partnership, respect, the chance to be more than just a widow struggling to survive. As they crested the ridge and the ranch came into view, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief, not gratitude, but something quieter and more enduring. Hope. The hope lasted exactly 6 days. 6 days of planning the combined ranch operation, of Reed and Evelyn mapping out pastures and planning schedules at the kitchen table while the children did lessons nearby. 6 days of something that felt almost like peace settling over the household. Then Calvin's final play came, and it came with violence. Evelyn was in the chicken coop when she heard the horses. Too many horses moving too fast. She straightened, eggs forgotten in her basket, and saw 5 riders cresting the ridge. Even from a distance, she recognized the man in front. Calvin Hart, his face twisted with something beyond anger. "Eli," she called sharply, "get your brothers and sisters inside, now." Eli appeared from the barn, took one look at the approaching riders, and ran toward the house. Evelyn moved to intercept Calvin, positioning herself between the riders and her children. Reed emerged from the stable, saw what was happening, and crossed the yard in long strides. Calvin reined up 10 feet from them, his 4 companions fanning out behind him. They were rough men, the kind who worked Calvin's lumber mill and didn't ask questions about legality. One held a rope coiled at his saddle. Another had a rifle across his lap. "You think you've won," Calvin said without preamble. "You think stealing my documents and turning a judge against me settles anything." "The judge saw the truth," Reed replied, his voice level. "That settles everything." "The truth," Calvin spat the word. "The truth is you're a crippled drifter who stuck his nose where it doesn't belong, and she's a widow who should have known her place." Evelyn felt Reed tense beside her. She touched his arm lightly, a warning. Violence here would only give Calvin what he wanted. "What do you want, Calvin?" she asked. "Justice. Real justice, not the bought kind you got in that courthouse." Calvin's eyes were wild, fever bright. "You humiliated me, destroyed my reputation, made me a laughingstock in front of the whole town." "You destroyed yourself," Evelyn said, "the moment you forged that debt claim." "I was owed," Calvin's voice rose. "Thomas took everything, the good land, the family name, respect. All I asked was a small piece of what should have been mine. But no, he had to be the hero, had to be perfect." The words hung in the cold air, revealing the poisoned root of everything. This wasn't about money or land. This was about jealousy, about a younger brother who'd watched the older one succeed and festered in resentment until it turned him cruel. "Thomas is dead," Evelyn said quietly. "Whatever was between you died with him. Let it go." "I'll let it go when you've paid what's owed." Calvin gestured to his men. "You took my reputation. I'm taking yours." The man with the rope moved forward. Reed's hand went to his gun, but Calvin already had his drawn, pointed steady at Reed's chest. "Don't," Calvin said. "I'd hate to shoot you in front of the widow, but I will." "What are you planning to do?" Reed's voice was deadly calm. "What should have happened from the start? You interfered with illegal debt collection. That's a crime. My men here are citizen deputies, authorized to arrest you and hold you for the sheriff." "That's a lie," Evelyn said. "You have no authority. I have 4 armed men, and you have children in that house." Calvin's smile was vicious. "Now, Mr. Callahan is going to hand over his gun and come along peaceable. And you, Evelyn, are going to stay here quiet until the real law arrives to sort this mess out." "The real law already sorted it," Reed said. "Judge dismissed your claim. You have no legal standing." "I have these men and these guns. That's all the standing I need." Calvin nodded to the man with the rope. "Disarm him." The mill worker dismounted, moving toward Reed with the confidence of someone who'd done violence before and expected no resistance. Reed didn't move, but Evelyn could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing odds, measuring distances, deciding if he could draw before Calvin fired. She made the decision for him. "Reed, don't!" She stepped forward, placing herself between Reed and Calvin's gun. "Please, the children are watching." And they were. Through the window, 6 small faces pressed against the glass. Eli's expression was fierce, prepared to do something reckless. Matthew looked terrified. The twins were crying. Even Grace seemed to understand danger when she saw it. Reed's jaw worked. Then, slowly, he unbuckled his gun belt and handed it over. The mill worker took it with a smirk, then produced the rope and began binding Reed's hands. "This won't stand," Reed said as the rope tightened. "When the real sheriff hears about this, the real sheriff is in Cheyenne for the week. Won't be back until Monday." Calvin's smile widened. "Leaves me plenty of time to make sure you understand the consequences of crossing me." Fear spiked through Evelyn's chest. 3 days until the sheriff returned. 3 days of Calvin having Reed at his mercy, no witnesses except the men he'd bought. "Where are you taking him?" "Old line shack up in the hills. Isolated, quiet." Calvin gestured to his men. "Get him on a horse." They hauled Reed toward the spare mount they'd brought. He didn't fight, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked every detail. Who was armed, who was paying attention, where the weaknesses were. "Calvin, please." Evelyn tried a different approach. "Whatever you think you're owed, taking him won't settle it. It'll just make things worse. Things are already as bad as they can get. I've lost everything, my reputation, my business prospects, my standing in this town, all because of him." Calvin's face twisted. "So, yes, he's going to pay, and you're going to know exactly how it feels to have someone you need taken from you." The words hit like a physical blow. Calvin wasn't just lashing out in anger. This was calculated cruelty, designed to hurt Evelyn by hurting Reed. "He's nothing to me," she tried. "Just a business arrangement. You want to punish me, then punish me directly." "Nice try." Calvin turned his horse. "But I've seen how you look at him, how he looks at you. It's not business. Maybe you haven't admitted it yet, but I can see it clear enough." Heat flooded Evelyn's face, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "You're wrong. Maybe. We'll find out, won't we? Calvin spurred his horse forward. His men followed, leading Reed's mount. As they passed, Reed caught Evelyn's eyes. "Take care of the children," he said quietly. "Don't do anything reckless." Then they were gone, disappearing over the ridge toward the high country. Evelyn stood frozen in the yard, her mind racing through options. She could ride to town, but with the sheriff gone, who would help? Most of Bitter Creek was either afraid of Calvin or in his pocket. She could try to follow them, but alone against 5 armed men, she'd be worse than useless. The door banged open. Eli ran out, his face flushed with anger and tears. "We have to help him. We can't just let them take him." "I know." Evelyn pulled her son close, feeling him shake. "I know, sweetheart. But right now, we need to be smart." "Being smart means doing nothing?" Eli pulled away, his voice breaking. "He saved us. He fought for us. And now he needs us, and we're just going to stand here?" "No. We're going to make a plan." Evelyn's voice hardened with resolve. "But we do it careful. Calvin wants us to do something reckless, wants an excuse to hurt more people. We don't give him that." She gathered all the children inside and sat them at the table. Grace climbed into her lap, thumb in her mouth. The others watched her with varying degrees of fear and anger and confusion. "Mr. Callahan has been taken by some bad men," Evelyn said, keeping her voice calm. "But he's strong and he's smart, and he survived worse than this." "What are we going to do?" Matthew asked. "First, we're going to secure the house, lock the doors and windows. Then we're going to figure out exactly where they took him and how to get him back." "How do we do that?" Eli demanded. Evelyn thought fast. "Calvin said an old line shack in the hills. There can't be that many. Reed would know. He knows this country. So we look at his maps, figure out the likely locations, and narrow it down." She sent the older children to Reed's study to find maps while she checked the house's defenses. The windows had good shutters, the doors had solid locks. Reed kept his spare rifle above the mantel, loaded and ready. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eli returned with maps and survey documents. Evelyn spread them across the table, searching for any notation that might indicate line shacks or outbuildings. Reed's handwriting covered the margins, notes about water sources, pasture quality, fence repairs needed. And there, in the northeast quadrant, a small notation. "Old Mackenzie shack, abandoned, needs roof repair." "There," Evelyn pointed. "That's where they'd go. Remote enough for privacy, close enough to reach before dark." "So we go get him." Eli's voice was fierce. "We can't, not tonight. Calvin's expecting us to try something foolish." Evelyn forced herself to think tactically. "But tomorrow, at first light, I ride out. Not to the shack, but to the Morrison Ranch. Jack Morrison is the judge's brother, and he has no love for Calvin after what we revealed in court." "What can he do?" "He can deputize men, form a proper posse with legal authority. Then we go to that shack and we get Reed back the right way." It was the smart plan, the safe plan. But every instinct screamed at Evelyn to saddle a horse and ride now, to hell with strategy. Reed had risked everything for her and her children. The thought of him hurt, alone, at Calvin's mercy, made her sick with fear and rage. But she had 6 children depending on her judgment. She couldn't let emotion override sense. They ate a subdued dinner. Evelyn put the younger children to bed early, then sat up with Eli and Matthew, teaching them how to load and fire Reed's spare rifle, just in case. "You really think Mr. Morrison will help?" Matthew asked. "I think decent people outnumber Calvin's kind. We just have to find them and remind them what's right." Near midnight, Evelyn finally sent the boys to bed and sat alone in the dark kitchen. Through the window, she could see the ridge where Calvin had disappeared with Reed. Somewhere up in those hills, Reed was cold and bound and paying the price for being decent. Calvin's words echoed in her mind. "I've seen how you look at him, how he looks at you." Was it true? Did she look at Reed differently than just a business partner, just a benefactor? When had the gratitude and respect started shifting into something deeper? When he'd bid $70 for her family's freedom, when he'd slept in the barn to make her feel safe, when he'd broken into Calvin's house at her side, when he'd offered partnership without condescension? Or had it been quieter than that, accumulated in small moments? The way he taught Eli about horses with patience, the way he never raised his voice to the children, The way he looked at her like she was capable, not broken. The way his rare smiles transformed his scarred face into something almost beautiful. Evelyn pressed her palms against her eyes. This was the worst possible time to be having these realizations. Reed was in danger. She needed to focus on getting him back safely, not on sorting through complicated feelings. But the feelings didn't care about timing. She must have dozed because suddenly it was dawn and someone was pounding on the door. Evelyn jerked awake, grabbing the rifle before remembering to check who it was. Through the window, Jack Morrison on horseback, his face grim. She opened the door. "Mr. Morrison." "I heard what happened." Morrison dismounted, his movements urgent. "My brother sent word last night. Calvin made threats in town before riding out here. When you didn't come seeking help, we got worried." Relief flooded through Evelyn. She wouldn't have to ride to him. He'd come to her. "Calvin took Reed. Claimed he's arresting him, but it's revenge for the trial. They have him in an old line shack up in the hills." Morrison's expression darkened. "How many men with Calvin?" "4 that I saw, all armed." "Then we'll need 6, minimum. I can round up that many from town, men who are tired of Calvin's bullying." He paused. "But we need to move fast. The longer Calvin has him, the worse this could get." "How soon can you gather your men?" 2 hours, maybe less. We ride out by 9. We can reach that shack before noon." Evelyn nodded, trying to keep the fear from showing. Noon felt like forever when every instinct screamed that Reed needed help now. Morrison must have read her face. "He's tough, Mrs. Hart. Survived worse than Calvin Hart, I'd wager. We'll get him back." After Morrison left, Evelyn woke the children and explained what was happening. Eli wanted to come. Evelyn almost said yes. His determination and courage deserved that respect. But he was 12 years old, and this was going to be dangerous. "I need you here," she said, "protecting your brothers and sisters. You're the oldest. You're the one I trust most. Can you do that for me?" Eli's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "If we're not back by sunset, you take everyone to Mrs. Hanson's place. Understand? Don't wait. Don't try to come after us. Just keep them safe." "I understand." Evelyn dressed in riding clothes and checked Reed's rifle one more time. She wasn't sure what she'd face at that line shack, but she'd be damned if she went unarmed. Morrison returned at 9:15 with 6 men, ranch hands, a blacksmith, the livery owner, and his own son. Good men with hard faces and their own reasons for disliking Calvin. "Ready?" Morrison asked. Evelyn mounted the horse Reed had taught her to ride just days ago. "Ready?" They rode hard toward the northeast hills. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of Wyoming winter day that made distance deceptive. What looked like an hour's ride could take 3. But Morrison knew the country, and he pushed them at a steady pace that ate up miles. Near 11, they slowed as the terrain grew rougher. Morrison raised a hand, signaling quiet. Through the trees ahead, smoke rose from a chimney, the line shack. They dismounted and approached on foot, spreading out to surround the building. It was small, maybe 15 feet square, built decades ago for shepherds and abandoned when the cattle operations took over. 2 horses were tied outside. Only 2. Morrison caught Evelyn's eye and held up 2 fingers. She nodded. Either Calvin had left most of his men elsewhere, or they'd gone back to town. Either way, better odds than 5 against 7. Morrison gestured for his men to take positions, then he and Evelyn approached the door directly. Morrison pounded on the wood. "Calvin Hart, this is Jack Morrison. Come out peaceful, and we'll talk this through legal." Silence. Then scuffling sounds inside. A voice, not Calvin's, called out. "We got a man in here. You come closer, and he gets hurt." "You hurt him, and you'll hang for it," Morrison replied. "There's 7 of us and 2 of you. Do the math." More scuffling. Then the door cracked open, and a man Evelyn recognized from the lumber mill stepped out, hands raised. "Wasn't my idea. Calvin paid me to watch him, that's all." "I didn't hurt nobody." "Where's Calvin?" Evelyn demanded. "Gone. Left last night after we got here. Said he had business in town." Rage flashed through Evelyn. Calvin had orchestrated this whole thing, then left his hired men to take the consequences while he established an alibi. "And Reed?" Her voice shook. "Inside. Tied up. He's alive, I swear." Morrison pushed past the mill worker into the shack. Evelyn followed, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. There, In the corner, bound hand and foot, Reed. His face was bruised, his lips split, but his eyes were clear and alert. "About time," he said, his voice rough. "Was starting to think I'd have to get out of here myself." Evelyn's knees nearly buckled with relief. She knelt beside him while Morrison cut the ropes. Reed's wrists were raw where he'd been working at his bonds, and he moved stiffly as feeling returned to his limbs. "How bad are you hurt?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing broken." Calvin wanted to make a point, not kill me. Reed accepted Morrison's help to stand, though I think he would have worked up to worse if he'd had more time. "Calvin's gone. Ran back to town last night." Reed's expression hardened. "Of course he did. Let his men take the risk while he plays innocent." They emerged from the shack to find Morrison's men had secured both of Calvin's hired hands. The men looked resigned. They knew what they'd done and that there'd be consequences. "What do we do with them?" one of Morrison's ranch hands asked. "Take them to town. Lock them up until the sheriff gets back." Morrison turned to Reed. "You'll need to file charges. Kidnapping, assault, unlawful imprisonment." "I'll file." Reed's jaw was set. And this time, Calvin won't wriggle out of it. They rode back to town in a grim procession. Evelyn stayed close to Reed, watching for signs he was more hurt than he'd admitted. But he sat his horse steady, his eyes fixed ahead with the intensity of a man planning his next move. In Bitter Creek, they secured Calvin's men in the small jail. Then Morrison sent riders to find Calvin. He wasn't at his house or his mill. He'd vanished like smoke, leaving his hired men to face justice alone. "He'll surface," Morrison said. "Man like Calvin can't stay hidden long. Too proud, too angry. He'll come back to make another play." "Then we'll be ready." Reed's voice was flat with certainty. They returned to the ranch as the sun touched the western ridges. The children exploded from the house, all 6 of them talking at once, crying, laughing, demanding to know what happened. Reed weathered their assault with surprising patience, answering questions and accepting hugs even from the younger ones who'd been shy around him before. Later, after the children were settled and Morrison had left, Reed sat at the kitchen table while Evelyn cleaned the cuts on his face. "You came after me," he said quietly. "Of course I did." "Calvin said you would. Said you'd do something reckless because you cared." Reed's gray eyes searched her face. "He was right, wasn't he?" Evelyn's hand stilled on the cloth. This was the moment for honesty. Reed had said it himself. Truth was the foundation of everything else. "Yes," she said simply. "He was right." Reed was quiet for a long moment. "Evelyn, I know this complicates things. The partnership, the arrangement, everything." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "But you asked for honesty, and that's the honest truth. Somewhere between the auction block and now, you became more than just someone helping us. You became someone I trust, someone I respect, someone I—" She couldn't quite say the word. "Not yet." "Someone you care about," Reed finished softly. "Yes." Reed's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gentle on her cheek. "Good. Because I've been half in love with you since I saw you on that platform refusing to break in front of your children." The words hung in the air between them, honest and true and terrifying in their implications. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's not... We barely know each other. I know you're strong and brave and fiercely protective. I know you'd rather starve than beg. I know you read to your children every night and you always serve them before yourself." Reed's voice was soft. "I know you deserve better than what life's given you, and I know that watching Calvin's men take me away scared you in a way that went beyond losing a business partner." Evelyn's eyes burned. "This is too fast. Thomas has only been gone 8 months. I shouldn't be feeling this." "There's no should about feelings. They come when they come." Reed's hand dropped away, giving her space. "But I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. The partnership stands on its own. You and the children have a place here regardless. This," he gestured between them, "doesn't have to change anything unless you want it to." "And if I do want it to change?" Reed's scarred face softened into something almost tender. "Then we take it slow. We see where it goes. We build something honest and real, same as we're doing with the ranch." Evelyn thought of Thomas, of the love they'd had, young and idealistic and full of dreams. That love was gone, buried with him in the Bitter Creek Cemetery. It didn't make this new feeling less real or less valid. It just made it different. "Slow sounds good," she said finally. Reed smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Slow it is." Outside, the winter night settled over the ranch. Inside, something new was beginning. Not a rescue, not a transaction, but something chosen by two people who'd survived their own kinds of hell and decided to build something better together. The next morning brought news. Calvin had been found trying to board a stage to Cheyenne. He'd been arrested, charged with kidnapping and assault. His hired men had confessed everything in exchange for lighter sentences. The case was solid. Calvin wouldn't wiggle free this time. Reed and Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the messenger ride away with Reed's formal statement. "It's really over," Evelyn said. "The legal part is. But Calvin's still dangerous. Desperate men do desperate things." "You think he'll try again?" Reed's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I think we stay alert. Keep the children close, and make sure he knows that if he comes back, we're ready." Evelyn squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Not as rescuer and rescued, but as partners building something that belonged to both of them. They'd been wrong about one thing. Calvin wasn't done. The warning came on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after his arrest. Reed was repairing the fence line between his property and what was now their combined land when he saw the rider approaching. Not the casual pace of a neighbor, but the urgency of someone carrying bad news. It was Morrison's son, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Calvin escaped," he said without preamble. "Last night. Overpowered a deputy, took a horse. Sheriff's forming a posse, but thought you should know first." Reed felt ice settle in his gut. "How long has he been gone?" 10 hours, maybe 12. Could be anywhere by now. Or he could be headed here." Reed's mind raced through possibilities. A desperate man with nothing left to lose wouldn't run. He'd want revenge first. "Tell your father I'm bringing my family to town. We'll wait there until Calvin's caught." The boy nodded and rode off. Reed sprinted back to the house, his heart pounding. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, teaching Rebecca how to make biscuits. The domestic scene felt suddenly fragile, threatened. "Calvin's escaped," he said. Evelyn's face went white. "When?" "Last night. We're going to town, now. Pack what you need for a few days." She didn't argue. Within 30 minutes, they had the children bundled into the wagon with hastily gathered belongings. Reed drove them to Bitter Creek at a pace just short of reckless, his eyes scanning the ridgelines for any sign of pursuit. Morrison met them at his brother's house. "You can stay here. It's the sturdiest building in town, and we've got armed men watching." They settled into an upstairs room, all 8 of them crowded together while armed guards patrolled outside. The children sensed the tension and grew quiet. Even Grace stopped her usual chatter, clinging to Evelyn with unusual stillness. Night fell. The posse returned empty-handed. Calvin had vanished into the wilderness like a ghost. "He knows this country," Morrison said grimly. "Could hide for weeks if he wanted." But Reed didn't think Calvin wanted to hide. He wanted payback. The attack came at 3 in the morning. Reed woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet instantly, shaking Evelyn awake. "Fire! Get the children up." They could hear shouting outside, men yelling warnings. Reed ran to the window and saw flames licking up the back of the Morrison house. The kitchen was ablaze, and the fire was spreading fast toward the stairs. "We need to get out," Evelyn said, already lifting Grace. Reed herded them toward the front stairs, but smoke was pouring up from below. The children were coughing, Rebecca crying. They couldn't go down that way. "The window," Reed decided. "We'll have to jump." It was a 12-foot drop, but better than burning. He threw open the window and looked down. Morrison and his men were there, spreading blankets to catch them. "Children first," Evelyn said. Reed lowered Eli out the window, let him hang, then dropped him into waiting arms. Matthew next, then the twins, then Rebecca. Grace screamed when Reed took her from Evelyn, but he passed her through quickly. "Your turn," he told Evelyn. "You first. Don't argue. Go." She climbed through the window and dropped. Reed followed, hitting the ground hard enough to jar his teeth. Behind them, the house was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the night sky. "Anyone else inside?" Morrison demanded. "Just us," Reed confirmed. Then Calvin got what he wanted, drove you out, destroyed property, and disappeared again. Morrison's face was black with soot and fury. "This can't continue. We need to end this tonight." "He'll expect us to chase him," Reed said. "He'll be ready for that." "So what do we do?" Reed looked at the burning house, at his huddled family, at the faces of the townspeople gathering to watch the destruction. Calvin had gone from legal maneuvering to attempted murder. The escalation was complete. "We give him what he really wants," Reed said slowly. "Which is?" "Me and Evelyn." Reed's voice hardened. "He wants revenge for the humiliation, for losing in court, for watching us build something while his life fell apart. So we give him the chance to take it." "That's suicide," Morrison protested. "No, it's bait." Reed turned to Evelyn. "If we go back to the ranch, alone, without guards, Calvin will come. He won't be able to resist." Evelyn understood immediately. "And when he does, we'll be ready." "Absolutely not," Morrison said. "I can't let you—" "It's not your choice," Evelyn interrupted. "This is our fight. Has been from the start. We end it our way." Morrison looked between them, seeing the determination in their faces. Finally, he nodded. "At least let me position men nearby, close enough to help if things go wrong." "A mile out," Reed agreed. "Close enough to hear a gunshot, far enough not to spook him." They made their plans as the fire burned down to embers. The children would stay in town with Mrs. Hanson. Morrison would take his men and wait in the hills, and Reed and Evelyn would return to the ranch and wait for Calvin to make his move. At dawn, they said goodbye to the children. Eli's face was tight with worry. "You're coming back, right?" he asked. "We're coming back," Evelyn promised, pulling him close. "We're ending this so you never have to be afraid again." She hugged each child, memorizing the feel of them in case something went wrong. Reed knelt beside Grace, smoothing her hair. "Be good for Mrs. Hanson," he said softly. "Papa come back?" Grace asked. It was the first time she'd called him that directly. Reed's throat tightened. "Papa's coming back, sweet girl. I promise." They rode out of town as the sun broke over the eastern ridges. The ranch looked peaceful in the morning light. No sign of disturbance, no hint that anything was wrong. But Reed's instincts screamed danger. Inside, they prepared. Reed checked both rifles, made sure they were loaded and ready. Evelyn positioned water buckets throughout the house in case Calvin tried fire again. They worked in tense silence, each knowing what the other was thinking. This could go terribly wrong. "If something happens to me," Reed said as afternoon shadows lengthened, "you take the children and you go. Don't try to be heroic. Just survive." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Evelyn said firmly, "but if it does, then I'll make sure Calvin pays for it." Her eyes were fierce. "But it won't come to that. We're smarter than him, and we're fighting for something real. He's just fighting from anger." Reed pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. These past weeks, they'd grown closer in small increments. Shared glances, hands touching over the dinner table, goodnight kisses that lingered. Not rushing, but building something solid. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I'm going to ask you to marry me. Properly. With a ring and a proposal and everything you deserve." Evelyn pulled back to look at him. "When this is over, I'm going to say yes." They held each other as the sun set, drawing strength from proximity. Then they separated and took up positions, Reed by the front window, Evelyn watching the back, waiting for Calvin to show himself. Night fell. Hours passed. Nothing moved except shadows and wind. Then, near midnight, Reed saw it. A figure approaching through the darkness, moving with the caution of someone who expected resistance. Calvin, alone, a rifle in his hands. "He's here," Reed said quietly. Evelyn moved to his side. They watched Calvin circle the house, checking for guards, for traps, finding nothing. Finally, he approached the front door. Reed and Evelyn moved away from the window, positioning themselves on either side of the entrance. They heard the door handle turn, heard Calvin step inside. Reed lit a lamp, flooding the room with light. Calvin froze, his rifle half raised. In the lamplight, he looked haggard, clothes filthy, face gaunt, eyes wild with sleeplessness and rage. Knew you'd come, Reed said calmly. His own rifle was pointed steady at Calvin's chest. Figured you'd be waiting. Calvin's voice was hoarse. Doesn't matter, I'm not leaving here without satisfaction. What satisfaction? Evelyn asked. You've lost everything. Your reputation, your business, your freedom. What more is there to take? Your happiness. Calvin's smile was a twisted thing. You think you've won. Think you get to build your little family and live peaceful. But I won't allow it. If I can't have peace, neither can you. So you'll what? Reed's voice was hard. Kill us. That'll get you hanged for sure. I'm already headed for the rope, escaping custody, attempted arson, attempted murder. What's 2 more bodies? Calvin's finger moved toward the trigger. At least I'll die knowing I took you with me. You won't shoot, Evelyn said. She stepped forward, away from cover. Reed made a sound of protest, but she kept moving. You want us to suffer like you're suffering. A quick death doesn't accomplish that. Calvin's rifle tracked her movement. Don't test me. I'm not testing. I'm stating facts. Evelyn's voice was steady. You're angry because you built your life on lies and shortcuts, and it finally caught up to you. Thomas had what you wanted, not because he took it from you, but because he worked for it honestly. And you couldn't stand watching him succeed while you schemed. Thomas was a fool, Calvin spat. Thomas was a good man, a better man than you'll ever be. Evelyn's words were sharp as blades. And you hated him for it. Hated that he was respected, loved, admired. Hated that when he died, people mourned him. Because you know when you die, Calvin, no one will mourn. They'll just be relieved. Calvin's face twisted with rage. The rifle swung up, aimed at Evelyn's heart. Reed fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Calvin jerked backward, his own rifle discharging into the ceiling. He stumbled, hitting the wall, then slid down, leaving a red streak behind him. Reed was across the room in seconds, kicking Calvin's rifle away. But it wasn't necessary. The shot had taken Calvin in the shoulder, painful, but not fatal. He slumped against the wall, breathing hard, his eyes glazed with shock and pain. It's over, Reed said. Outside, they heard horses approaching, Morrison and his men responding to the gunshot as planned. Within minutes, the house was full of armed men securing Calvin and assessing the situation. He attacked you, Morrison asked. Broke into the house with intent to kill, Reed confirmed. I shot in defense. Witnesses can confirm the threat. He gestured to Evelyn. Calvin laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Witnesses, defense, you think legal words matter anymore? I'm finished. We all know it. Yes, Evelyn said quietly. You are. They watched as Morrison's men hauled Calvin away, this time in chains. His blood stained the floor, his defeat total and complete. Whatever threat he'd posed was ended. When the house finally emptied, Reed and Evelyn stood alone in the silence. The lamp still burned, casting shadows on the walls. Reed's hands were shaking with aftermath, and Evelyn's face was pale. You stepped in front of his gun, Reed said. I knew you'd shoot first. You couldn't have known that. Yes, I could. Evelyn moved into his arms. I know you, Reed Callahan. Know you'd die before you'd let harm come to someone under your protection. Reed held her tight, feeling the tremors running through both of them. It's over. Really over this time. Yes. They stood together as the night wind rattled the windows and the lamp burned low. Tomorrow would bring questions and statements and legal proceedings. But tonight, they simply held each other and breathed and remembered how to feel safe. The trial was mercifully swift. Calvin pleaded guilty to all charges: escape, arson, attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyer advised cooperation in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, far enough away that he'd never threaten Bitter Creek again. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and revealing the land's bones. Reed and Evelyn stood on the ridge between their properties, surveying the combined ranch spread below them. We'll need to hire hands for calving season, Reed said. Maybe 3 or 4 good men. And I want to expand the garden, plant enough to sell surplus in town. Evelyn's mind was already planning. The children can help. Good for them to learn the work. Speaking of the children, Reed turned to face her. I believe I made you a promise about a proper proposal. Evelyn's heart kicked up its rhythm. I believe you did. Reed pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside, a simple gold band set with a modest sapphire. Nothing extravagant, but chosen with care. Evelyn Hart, you're the strongest woman I've ever met. The bravest. The most stubborn. He smiled. You've been through hell and come out fighting. You've built a family worth dying for and a life worth living. And somehow, miraculously, you've decided I might be worth including in it. Reed, let me finish. His voice softened. I know I'm not much. A scarred rancher with a dark past and no family to speak of. But I love you. Love your children. Love the life we're building. And I'd be honored if you'd let me be part of it, officially. As your husband. As a father to those 6 incredible kids. As your partner in all things. Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks. You're wrong about one thing. What's that? You are much. You're everything. She took the ring from the box, holding it up to catch the sunlight. Yes, Reed Callahan, I'll marry you. I'll build this life with you. I'll love you the way you deserve to be loved. Reed slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that tasted of promise and new beginnings. Below them, the ranch waited. Their ranch. Their future. Their home. They married the following Sunday in a simple ceremony attended by half of Bitter Creek. The townspeople who'd watched Evelyn be sold on an auction block now watched her choose partnership freely. The difference was everything. Eli walked his mother down the aisle. Matthew and the twins stood as witnesses. Rebecca scattered wildflowers. And Grace, not quite understanding but caught up in the joy, called Reed Papa, loud enough for everyone to hear. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, food contributed by neighbors eager to celebrate. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Reed pulled Evelyn aside. I have something for you, he said, something I found in your old house when we were cleaning it out. He handed her a small wooden box, worn with age. Evelyn recognized it immediately, Thomas's personal box, the one he'd kept in his desk. She'd thought it lost when Calvin's men had ransacked the place. How did you? Found it buried in the barn. Calvin must have missed it in his hurry. Reed's expression was gentle. I looked inside. Thought you should have it. With trembling fingers, Evelyn opened the box. Inside, letters, dozens of them, written in Thomas's hand. Letters to her. Letters to each child. Letters labeled to be opened on their wedding days and when they have children of their own and when they need guidance. Thomas had known. Somehow, in those final weeks of his illness, he'd known he was dying. And he'd written these letters to span the years he wouldn't have, to be the father and husband he couldn't be in person. He loved you all so much, Reed said quietly. These should be part of your family's story, part of what you carry forward. Evelyn clutched the box to her chest, overwhelmed by the gift Thomas had left and the gift Reed had preserved. Thank you for understanding, for not being threatened by him. How could I be threatened by the man who created the family I'm honored to join? Reed touched her face gently. Thomas gave them life and a foundation. I'm just grateful to help build on what he started. That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Reed and Evelyn sat on the porch swing Reed had built during the spring. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air sweet with sage and new grass. Tell me about the scar, Evelyn said. She'd never asked directly, had let Reed share what he was comfortable sharing. But now, as his wife, she wanted to know all of him. Reed was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the puckered line on his face. Guard in Andersonville. I've told you about almost running, about staying with that dying boy. What I didn't tell you was that the guard didn't just hit me. He wanted to make sure I'd remember, so he took his knife and... He paused. Said he was carving a reminder into my face. That every time I looked in a mirror, I'd remember the price of thinking I was better than my circumstances. Oh, Reed. For years it worked. I saw this scar and remembered being helpless, being property, being less than human. His hand found hers. But then I saw you on that auction block, and I realized the guard was wrong. The scar doesn't remind me of being helpless. It reminds me I survived, that I'm still here to choose differently. Evelyn brought his scarred hand to her lips. I'm glad you survived. Glad you were there that day. Glad you chose us. Best choice I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night settle over their land. Their combined property stretched across 200 acres now, enough for cattle and crops, enough for the children to inherit something real. The seasons turned. Summer brought branding and haying, autumn brought harvest and preparation for winter. The children grew into their roles on the ranch, Eli becoming Reed's shadow, learning every aspect of ranching. Matthew discovered a talent for record-keeping and numbers. The twins excelled at gardening and preserving. Rebecca's gentle way with animals made her the perfect caretaker for the growing chicken flock and the barn cats. Even Grace, still small, had her job collecting eggs and feeding the bottle calves. On a crisp October evening, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table reading one of Thomas's letters. This one was addressed to her, labeled, "When You've Found Happiness Again." "My dearest Evelyn," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've survived the worst and found your way back to joy. I cannot tell you how grateful that makes me, even from beyond the grave. You were always stronger than you knew, braver than circumstances required. You loved fiercely and protected ruthlessly, and our children thrived because of it. But you also deserve to be loved and protected in return. I pray you found someone who sees your worth, who honors your strength, who stands beside you as an equal partner. Do not feel guilt for moving forward. Do not let my memory become a cage. I loved you with everything I had, and that love wants your happiness, even if that happiness includes someone new, especially if it does. Build the life you deserve, raise our children in joy rather than grief, and know that somewhere beyond, I'm watching with pride and gratitude that you fought through the darkness and chose light. Forever yours in spirit." Thomas Evelyn folded the letter carefully, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of permission, of peace. Thomas had given his blessing for the very life she was now living. Reed found her there, reading by lamplight. "You all right?" "More than all right." She showed him the letter. Thomas knew. Somehow he knew I'd need this. Reed read it slowly, his expression softening. When he finished, he pulled Evelyn into his arms. "He was a wise man, and he loved you well." "He did, and so do you." Evelyn looked up at her husband. "Different kinds of love, but both real, both valuable. I'll never try to replace him." "I know, you're not his replacement. You're your own person, bringing your own gifts." She smiled. "Thomas gave me roots. You're giving me wings." That winter, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a complex tangle of emotions: joy at the new life, grief that this would be her first child without Thomas, fear about how the other children would respond. But the children surprised her. When she gathered them to share the news, they erupted in excitement. Even Eli, who she'd worried might feel displaced, grinned widely. "We're going to have a baby?" Rebecca asked, her eyes huge. "Yes, sweetheart, in the spring." "Will it be a brother or sister?" Samuel wanted to know. "We'll find out when the baby arrives." Grace climbed into Reed's lap. "Papa's baby too?" Reed's voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, sweet girl, Papa's baby too." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. As Evelyn's belly grew, the children debated names and fought over who would get to hold the baby first. Reed built a new cradle, carving their combined initials into the headboard alongside the date and a simple phrase, "Love builds on love." The baby came on a bright April morning, arriving with the kind of speed that left the midwife barely enough time to wash her hands. A girl, healthy and loud and perfect in every way. They named her Hope. Hope Callahan, daughter of Reed and Evelyn, sister to 6, symbol of everything they'd survived and everything they'd built. When Reed held his daughter for the first time, his scarred face transformed with wonder. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She is," Evelyn agreed, "just like this whole beautiful, complicated family." As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt like home. 7 children playing in the yard while their parents worked side by side. Meals around a table that was never quiet. Laughter and arguments and the messy, glorious reality of a family knit together by choice and circumstance. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Evelyn leaned against Reed's shoulder. "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" I don't remember the last time I thought about that auction block, the last time I felt afraid or ashamed or less than whole. She looked at their thriving ranch, at the children playing tag in the yard, at baby Hope sleeping in Reed's arms. Calvin tried to break us, tried to reduce us to property, to things with a price tag, but we proved him wrong. We proved a lot of people wrong, Reed agreed. Everyone who thought a widow couldn't survive, a scarred man couldn't love, a patchwork family couldn't thrive. We're not a patchwork family. Evelyn's voice was firm. We're just a family, real as any other, maybe more real, because we chose it. Reed kissed the top of her head. Chosen family, I like that. They sat together as the Wyoming sky blazed orange and pink and purple, as their children's laughter echoed across the land, as Hope slept peacefully unaware of the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The auction block was a memory. Calvin was imprisoned and irrelevant. Thomas's letters provided blessing and continuity. And here, on this ranch built from combined dreams and hard work and love that had grown despite impossible odds, the Callahan family had found something neither Reed nor Evelyn had thought possible after their respective losses. They'd found home. Not the kind of home that's just a building or a piece of land, but the kind built from trust and partnership and 7 children who called Reed Papa without hesitation. The kind where scars were badges of survival rather than shame. The kind where a widow could build a new future without betraying her past. The kind where an auction that should have destroyed everything instead became the beginning of something beautiful. Years later, when the children were grown with families of their own, they'd gather on this porch and tell the story. The story of how their mother was sold on an auction block and their father bid $70 for a family. How they'd fought fraud and danger and built a ranch that spanned 200 acres. How love could grow in the darkest soil and bloom into something worth far more than any price tag. But that was years away. Tonight, they were simply a family watching the sunset, grateful for survival and second chances, for chosen bonds and hard-won peace. Hope stirred in Reed's arms. Grace called for her mother to watch her cartwheel. The older children argued cheerfully about whose turn it was to collect eggs in the morning, and Evelyn, watching it all, felt her heart swell with a gratitude so profound it ached. They'd started with nothing but desperation and $70. They'd built everything that mattered.